He had spent most of his life doing everything he could for others, providing, supporting, protecting. But now, at 82, all he could think about was how he didn't want to hold anyone back. Not his children, not his grandchildren, not even the neighbors who offered to help carry his groceries. He had never wanted to be a burden, and yet, as the years wore on, that's exactly how he felt. The quiet truth settled into his bones each morning. He wasn't needed anymore, at least not in the way he once was. Arthur had always been strong, not just in body, but in spirit. He was the man people came to for advice, for help, for steady hands and steady words. But now, they came to offer help, to check in, to make sure he was okay. They meant well, he knew that. But every time someone asked, "Do you need anything?" he heard something else. "You can't do this alone." He didn't want pity. He didn't want careful smiles or soft voices. What he wanted, more than anything, was to feel alive again. To do something that reminded him and everyone else that he was still here, still capable, still Arthur. But what could a man his age possibly do to feel that way? There was one thing. A dream he had carried for decades, quietly, like a small flame he'd never let go out. And now, with time running short, he wondered, was it too late? Or could he still take the risk that might change everything? What happened next would not only surprise his family, it would surprise himself. He just didn't want to be a burden. If you've ever felt that way, maybe this story is for you. And if you're still here, feel free to subscribe. Arthur grew up in a world where being useful was everything. Born during the late years of the Great Depression, in a small town where everyone knew each other's names and struggles, he learned early that a man's worth was measured by what he could do for others. His father worked long days in a dusty workshop, fixing farm equipment and household tools for neighbors who often paid in eggs or bread instead of dollars. Arthur would watch him, wide-eyed, fascinated by the way his father's hands moved with confidence and purpose. Even as a boy, he wanted to be like that, strong, reliable, needed. By the time he was 12, Arthur was already helping with odd jobs around town. He'd chop firewood for the older folks on the block, run errands for his mother, patch fences with his father. And every time someone said, "Thank you, son," or "You're a good boy," something inside him swelled with quiet pride. He wasn't just a kid, he was someone who mattered. Adventure wasn't something he thought much about in those early years. Life was practical, built on doing what needed to be done. But sometimes, late at night, lying in bed and listening to the distant sound of trains passing through the valley, he would imagine. He'd picture himself on those trains, going west, seeing mountains, deserts, oceans, places that seemed as far away as the stars. He didn't talk about it. Dreams like that weren't for boys like him. But still, they lived in him, quietly. As he grew, responsibility came quickly. His father's health declined, and Arthur stepped in, taking over more and more. By the time he was 17, he was the man of the house, working full-time, making sure his mother and younger sisters were cared for. He didn't complain. This was what life was, stepping up, being needed. There was no room for selfishness, no time for chasing distant horizons. But even as the years turned into decades, that flicker of longing never quite left him. He married young, to a woman who valued the same things he did: hard work, family, stability. Together, they built a life, raised children, weathered storms both financial and personal. Arthur was proud of the life they had, proud of the role he played. But deep down, he always wondered what it would feel like to do something just for himself. Something daring. Something that wasn't about being needed, but about being alive. Now, at 82, with his children grown and his wife gone, the world seemed smaller than ever. The people who used to rely on him had moved on, and he was left with long days and longer nights, wondering if his usefulness had run its course. But maybe, just maybe, he still had one more thing left to do. One more adventure. Since you're still watching, maybe there's a part of you that wonders the same. Maybe it's not too late for either of us. Subscribe if you believe that. As Arthur entered his 80s, he noticed the subtle shifts first, the way people spoke to him more slowly, how they reached for his arm when stepping off a curb, how his children insisted on doing the heavy lifting, even when he didn't ask. At first, he appreciated their care. It was nice, he thought, to be looked after for a change. But over time, those small kindnesses began to feel like invisible walls closing in. They didn't mean any harm, he knew that. His daughter would drop by with groceries, fussing over him, making sure the fridge was full, the thermostat set just right. His son would call every evening, asking about his day, reminding him to take his pills. And though Arthur would thank them, nod, smile, and sigh, he was shrinking. He began to avoid mentioning the small aches in his knees, the times he lost his balance for just a second, the nights when he couldn't sleep. If they knew, they'd only worry more, and he didn't want that. He didn't want them to rearrange their lives around him. He didn't want to be the reason they missed out on their own joys. More than anything, he didn't want to be a problem they had to solve. That fear, the fear of being a burden, settled in his chest like a weight. Every time he asked himself what purpose he served now, he struggled to find an answer. The days stretched longer, filled with routines that felt more like obligations than joys. Breakfast, a walk, the same TV shows, the same books. The clock ticking, always ticking. One afternoon, as he sat in his favorite chair by the window, watching the wind stir the leaves outside, his eyes fell on an old photo album. He pulled it from the shelf, flipping through pages filled with faces and places, memories of a life well lived. Weddings, holidays, birthdays, all the moments that made up his years. And there, tucked between two photographs, was something he hadn't seen in decades, a worn postcard, faded at the edges. It was from the Grand Canyon, sent by a friend long ago. The image on the front showed the vast, red cliffs stretching out beneath a blue sky, endless and wild. On the back, a simple message: "You'd love this place, Art. One day, you have to see it for yourself." He held the card in his hands, tracing the handwriting with his thumb. That dream, that wild, impossible dream, stirred inside him again, sharper now, more urgent. Why hadn't he ever gone? Why had he always waited? Because he had always been needed. And now, with no one needing him, he wondered, could he do something for himself? Even now? Could he still go? He didn't know. But for the first time in a long time, he felt something other than fear. He felt a spark. Arthur sat with the postcard resting lightly in his lap, as if it might crumble with the wrong touch. The Grand Canyon. It wasn't just about the place, it was about what it stood for. Freedom. Wonder. A kind of boldness he had never allowed himself. He had spent his life making the safe choices, the necessary choices. But now, sitting there, 82 and alone, with no one expecting anything from him, he asked himself a question he hadn't dared to consider. What if I just went? The thought seemed reckless at first, even foolish. He hadn't traveled in years. His legs didn't move like they used to. His back ached if he stood too long, and more than once he had caught himself forgetting little things, where he put his keys, why he had entered a room. But beneath those doubts was something stronger, something that refused to be ignored. He didn't want his final years to be defined by fear, by the slow retreat into a smaller and smaller life. He wanted to feel alive, if only once more. He began slowly. That evening, he sat at the kitchen table with a pen and notepad, scribbling down ideas, questions. Could he drive that far? Should he fly? Was there a tour? How long would it take? He didn't know, but the act of writing it down made it real, made it possible. The next day, he walked to the library, something he hadn't done in years. The familiar smell of old books greeted him, grounding him in a place where time seemed to move more gently. He asked the librarian, a woman half his age but full of kindness, if she could help him find information on traveling to Arizona. Planning a trip? She asked, smiling. Thinking about it, Arthur replied, a small spark in his eyes. She returned with a few guidebooks, some maps, and a list of websites he could check later. It's a beautiful place, she said. I went there once. Changed the way I saw the world. Arthur thanked her, tucking the books under his arm, the weight of them strangely comforting. At home, he pored over the pages, looking at photos of the canyon bathed in sunrise light, reading about trails and viewpoints, places with names like Bright Angel and Desert View. Each image fed the fire growing inside him. But with the dream came fear. What if he fell? What if something happened and no one was there? What if this was a mistake? He thought of his children, of their worried faces if he told them. They would try to stop him. He was sure of it. "Dad, it's too much," they'd say. "You're not young anymore." But wasn't that the point? He wasn't young. He didn't have time to waste. That night, he stood in front of the mirror, looking at himself, the lines on his face, the silver in his hair, the years etched into his skin. And yet, his eyes still held that same spark, the same quiet strength he had carried since he was a boy helping his father in the workshop. He placed the postcard on the nightstand, next to his clock, and whispered to himself, "Let's see if I still can." Arthur woke up the next morning with a sense of purpose that surprised him. His body still ached in the usual places, and his knees still protested when he stood, but something inside him felt different, lighter, more awake. He walked to the kitchen, brewed his coffee, and looked out the window as the sun climbed steadily into the sky. Today wouldn't be like the others. Today, he would begin. He started small. His first goal was simple: walk farther than he had in months. There was a park not far from his house, one he used to visit with his wife on cool afternoons. Lately, he had avoided it, unsure if he could make it there and back without stopping too often. But now, he laced up his shoes, grabbed his old walking stick, and stepped outside. The air was crisp, fresh with the scent of blooming grass and distant flowers. Arthur took slow, steady steps, listening to the sound of birds in the trees and the familiar crunch of gravel beneath his feet. His legs felt stiff, and after a few blocks, his breath came faster, but he didn't turn back. He pushed on, one foot in front of the other, until the trees of the park came into view, and the path curved gently toward the pond where he and his wife used to sit. He reached the bench they had once claimed as their own and lowered himself down with a slow exhale. He looked around, watching children play, couples stroll, and joggers pass by without notice of the old man resting in their midst. But Arthur didn't mind. He wasn't here to be seen. He was here to prove to himself that he could still do something hard, something real. That evening, he marked a small note on his notepad: "Walk to the park." No stopping. The next day, he went again. And the day after. Each time, the walk became a little easier, his breath a little steadier, his confidence a little stronger. He began to stretch in the mornings, simple movements to loosen his back and legs. He dug out an old backpack from the closet, filling it with a water bottle, a map, and a few essentials, practicing carrying it on his short walks. But still, a question lingered. Should he tell them? His daughter would worry the most. Sarah had always been protective, even when she was young. After their mother passed, she had taken on more than her share, making sure Arthur was cared for, always reminding him to rest, to be careful, to take it easy. And now, he was about to do something she would never expect. He thought about calling, about easing into the conversation. But each time he picked up the phone, he hesitated, imagining her voice, the concern, the reasons why he shouldn't. So he didn't call. Not yet. Instead, he planned. He researched bus routes, looking into tours that catered to seniors, ones that would allow him to go at his own pace. He checked the weather, read stories of others who had done the trip, and with every step, the dream grew closer, more real. He wasn't ready to tell them. Not until he knew, without a doubt, that he could do it. Because this wasn't about defying them. It was about reclaiming himself. It was a Sunday morning, the kind Arthur usually spent quietly, reading the paper, sipping coffee, maybe watching a bit of television before his daughter's regular call. But this Sunday felt different. He had made his decision. The trip was no longer just a thought, a dream. It was a plan. The bus ticket was purchased, the accommodations booked. In 1 week, he would leave for the Grand Canyon. But first, he had to tell Sarah. He sat by the phone for a long time, staring at it, the familiar weight of hesitation pressing on his chest. He imagined how the conversation might go, her voice rising with concern, the endless list of what-ifs, the inevitable suggestion that they could go together, that he shouldn't be doing this alone. And yet, he knew this was something he had to do on his own. Finally, he picked up the phone and dialed. "Hi, Dad." Sarah's voice was warm, cheerful. "How are you feeling today?" Arthur cleared his throat, trying to steady his voice. "I'm all right, honey. Actually, I've got something I need to tell you." There was a pause. Everything okay? Yes, he said quickly. Everything's fine. But I'm going on a trip. A trip? She repeated, confused. Where? To the Grand Canyon. Silence. You mean, like, on TV? Or some documentary? No, Arthur said, a small smile forming. I mean for real. I'm going there. Next week. Dad. Wait. What? You're serious. Dead serious. Another pause. But why? And how? I mean, are you sure that's a good idea? Arthur leaned back in his chair, his voice gentle but firm. I've always wanted to see it. For years. And I'm not getting any younger. I've made all the arrangements, and I've been getting ready for it. I can do this. Dad, I just don't want you to get hurt. You know how things are now. You don't have to do this alone. I know. But I want to. I need to. Sarah sighed, the worry clear in her silence. You should have told me sooner. I could have helped. I know, he said softly. But this one, I need to do for me. To prove I'm still capable. That I'm not just sitting here waiting. There was a long pause, then a quieter voice. Are you really sure, Dad? Arthur nodded, even though she couldn't see. Yes. I've never been more sure. I'm scared, she admitted. But I get it. Just promise me you'll check in. Let me know you're okay. I promise. When he hung up, Arthur felt a strange mixture of relief and anticipation. It hadn't been easy, but he had done it. He had told her. And while her worry lingered, she hadn't tried to stop him. He looked around the room, his eyes landing on his small backpack, packed and ready. It was time. Time to live, not just remember. Time to go. The morning of his departure arrived with a quiet stillness, the kind that settles over the world just before dawn. Arthur awoke before the sun had fully risen, the soft gray light barely filtering through his curtains. He sat on the edge of his bed for a moment, feeling the familiar stiffness in his joints, but also something new, anticipation, like a boy before his first day of school. He moved slowly but steadily, dressing in the clothes he had laid out the night before, a sturdy pair of trousers, a comfortable button-down shirt, and his old brown jacket, worn but dependable. His small backpack sat by the door, packed with everything he thought he might need: a water bottle, a notebook, the postcard from the Grand Canyon, and a few snacks Sarah had insisted he take. He had double-checked his bus ticket, the itinerary, and the weather. Everything was ready. Stepping outside, he breathed in the crisp morning air, the coolness filling his lungs and sharpening his senses. The world was quiet, peaceful, as if holding its breath alongside him. The taxi arrived right on time, the driver helping him with his bag, offering a cheerful, "Big trip today?" Arthur smiled, nodding. Something like that. At the bus station, he found his seat near the window, settling in as the engine hummed alive. As the city slowly faded into the distance, Arthur watched the scenery change, buildings giving way to open fields, highways stretching out like veins across the land. Each mile felt like a small victory, a step further from the fears that had kept him still for so long. The other passengers were a mix of young travelers, families, and a few older folks like himself, though none seemed to be traveling alone. He didn't mind. For the first time in years, he was alone by choice, not by circumstance, and that made all the difference. He pulled out his notebook, jotting down small thoughts as they came: the color of the sky, the sound of the wheels on the road, the way his heart felt just a little lighter with each passing hour. As the bus rolled on, they made brief stops in small towns, places Arthur had never seen but found strangely comforting. He stretched his legs, spoke briefly with a kind woman who asked about his journey, and felt the warmth of simple human connection. There was no rush, no pressure, just the steady rhythm of the road and the quiet certainty that he was exactly where he needed to be. By late afternoon, the landscape began to shift, the flat plains giving way to rocky outcroppings, the colors of the earth deepening into shades of red and gold. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows, and Arthur could feel it. He was getting close. When the bus finally pulled into the small town near the canyon, he stepped off with a sense of awe. The air was different here, dry and clear, carrying a stillness that seemed to echo the vastness of the land. He made his way to the modest inn where he would stay, greeted by a friendly clerk who handed him a key and wished him a good night. In his room, Arthur stood by the window, looking out at the fading light. He was tired, yes, but it was the kind of tired that came from living, not just existing. Tomorrow, he would see it, and something told him it would be worth everything. The morning sun rose early, casting golden light across the small town nestled near the canyon's edge. Arthur woke with a quiet excitement stirring in his chest, his body still aching from the long trip, but his spirit sharp, focused. Today was the day. Today, he would stand where he had only dreamed for decades. The Grand Canyon, vast, ancient, impossible. And he was here. He dressed carefully, choosing layers to protect against the chill of the early hours, but knowing the desert heat would come later. His hands moved with purpose, folding the postcard and tucking it into his pocket. It had traveled with him this far. It wouldn't stay behind now. Stepping outside, he was greeted by the open sky, endless and deep blue, a canvas stretching far beyond what he had known. The shuttle to the canyon was waiting, and as he climbed aboard, he found a seat near the front, eager to see every bit of the landscape as they approached. The driver, a cheerful man in his 40s, offered a few facts about the park, but Arthur only half listened. His mind was elsewhere, on the cliffs, the colors, the moment he would finally arrive. The road wound through sparse forests, patches of sunlit rock, and then, suddenly, the trees parted, and there it was. Even from a distance, it took his breath away. The Grand Canyon opened before him like a secret finally revealed, layers upon layers of red, orange, gold, and brown carved into the earth, stretching farther than the eye could see. The sheer scale of it made him feel small, but not in the way he had feared for so long. This was a different kind of small, not insignificant, but connected, part of something vast and timeless. He stepped off the shuttle slowly, walking toward the railing, his heart pounding in his chest. The wind was strong here, cool and steady, carrying the scent of dust and stone. He placed his hands on the metal bar, leaning slightly forward, letting his eyes drink in every detail. The river far below, a ribbon of silver, the shadows dancing along the cliffs, the silence, so deep, so full. For a long time, Arthur said nothing, thought nothing. He simply stood there, breathing, seeing, being. And then he reached into his pocket and pulled out the postcard. Holding it up, he compared the faded image to the real thing, a soft laugh escaping his lips. "It's even better," he whispered. A couple nearby offered to take his picture, and for once, he didn't refuse. He stood tall, smiling, the canyon behind him, the wind tugging gently at his jacket. The camera clicked, freezing the moment, proof, not for others, but for himself, that he had come, that he had done what he once believed impossible. As the sun climbed higher, casting new colors into the depths below, Arthur found a bench and sat, pulling out his notebook. He wrote, slowly, carefully, "I made it. I am not a burden. I am still alive." The ride home felt different. The road, the towns, the same seat by the window, they were all there, unchanged. But Arthur wasn't. He sat quietly, the postcard still tucked in his pocket, the photo of him at the canyon now resting safely in his backpack. He had looked at it more than once, not out of vanity, but to remind himself that it was real, that he had done it. The weight he had carried for so long, the fear of being a burden, of being left behind, had begun to lift the moment he saw the canyon with his own eyes. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He had lived something big. As the bus rolled back into the city, Arthur felt a flicker of nervousness. What would Sarah say? Would she be angry or relieved? He had promised to call, to check in, and he had short messages, just enough to ease her worry. But he hadn't shared everything. He wanted to tell her in person, wanted her to see the change in him, not just hear it. When the taxi dropped him off at his house, the sun was just beginning to set. The sky was streaked with soft oranges and purples, and the air was warm, filled with the sounds of birds settling for the night. Arthur stood for a moment, taking it in, feeling the ground beneath his feet, steady and familiar. He unlocked the door, stepped inside, and was greeted by the comforting stillness of home. But even here, everything felt new. The walls, the furniture, The photos on the shelf, they hadn't changed, but they didn't seem quite so heavy anymore. He placed his backpack on the table, pulled out the photo, and smiled. A knock came at the door. It was Sarah. She rushed in, eyes wide, her arms wrapping around him before he could even speak. "Dad, you're home. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart," he said, holding her close. "Better than fine." She stepped back, studying him, looking for signs of strain, of fatigue. But what she saw instead was something she hadn't noticed in years: light in his eyes, strength in his stance. "I have something to show you," he said, handing her the photo. Her hand covered her mouth as she stared at it. "You really did it." "I did." She sat down, tears welling. "I was so scared, Dad. But you look happy." "I am," he said. "I needed to prove to myself that I still could. Not for you, not for anyone. For me." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I understand." They sat together, talking into the evening, Arthur sharing stories of the trip, the canyon, the way he felt standing there alone, yet more connected than ever. From that day on, Sarah saw him differently. Not as someone fragile, needing protection, but as a man who had faced his fears and found freedom. Arthur wasn't done living, and he never would be as long as he had the courage to keep moving forward. Arthur's journey didn't end when he came home. It began again, in a quieter, deeper way. The trip to the Grand Canyon had changed something inside him, something that didn't fade with time or distance. Every morning, when he rose and looked at the photo on the table, he didn't just see himself at the edge of that vast, wild place. He saw the truth of who he still was. Not just a man who had lived a long life, but a man who was still living it. He no longer feared being a burden. He no longer let the weight of years tell him who he could or couldn't be. He knew, now, that life doesn't end when you get older. It changes, yes, but it's still full of moments waiting to be claimed, still full of risks worth taking. His family saw it too. They stopped asking if he needed help with everything. They started asking what he wanted to do next. And sometimes, they simply sat with him, listening to stories they had never heard before, because now they knew his life was still unfolding. Arthur didn't need to climb mountains or travel far every week to feel alive. It wasn't about the scale of the adventure, but about the spirit behind it. About waking up with purpose, with curiosity, with the quiet knowing that he still had more to give, more to see, more to feel. And if you've made it here, maybe you feel that too. Maybe you've wondered if your time is past, if your dreams are too old, too late, too far away. But let Arthur's story remind you, it's never too late. Not to take a risk, not to find your strength, not to live for yourself. Because no matter your age, no matter how many years have gone by, there is still something waiting for you, something beautiful, something real. You are not a burden. You are not finished. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment and share a dream you still carry. Like this video if you believe in second chances, and subscribe to join a community that knows life doesn't stop, it just keeps surprising us. And remember, it's never too late to dream.